Beowulf manuscript, a complete chronological history. Beowulf manuscript from monastery to fire, from oral tradition to digital resurrection, part 1. I'm going to shoot a video I was supposed to do end of December, but then decided to take a couple of weeks off while I prep other stuff. Was supposed to do it at the beginning of January. Tried it 3 times. It failed each time. Hated it. So all I'm going to do now is read that newsletter that I made for this video that I was supposed to make a really long, like 3 fucking months ago. So it's called Beowulf Manuscripts. Obviously, the complete chronological history. Now, this is going to be 2 parts, and it's very, very long. Before the manuscript we know today was even written down, Beowulf existed in some form, oral tradition, lost copies, earlier written versions, maybe. This period defined by scholarly. My English are not so good there. Debate and educated guesses, which is absolutely true because we don't know specifically what year the manuscript was made. And of course, we don't know when the story was created, although we'll get to that in just a second. Down the bottom, when we get to Kevin Kiernan, as you can see there. The truth about where the poem was composed remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in English literature. The traditional view. So this is what the vast majority of scholars believe. Early composition, 700s to 750. For most 20th century scholars, placed the poem's composition in an age of Bede or shortly thereafter. The golden age of Northumbrian culture. The argument goes like this. The poem's language reflects the earlier Anglian dialect, Mercian or Northumbrian, that was later translated into the West Saxon dialect of the surviving manuscripts. The poem's themes and cultural references fit better with the 8th century Northumbrian core culture than with later periods. So they're talking about the language used, the syntax, and all that kind of stuff. That it was literally transferred verbatim over, and we do know that there are some mistakes within that, which I think adds credence to the fact that it was copied rather than someone speaking it and someone writing it down, which is again what Kevin Kiernan believes. The poem's treatment of pagan heroism and Christian morality suggests suggests a traditional period when both worldviews coexisted. Sure. This theory assumes that the manuscript we have is a copy of a much earlier original, a copy made centuries after the poem was first composed. The scribes who wrote it down around 1000 were preserving an ancient text, not creating a new one. And something about that, I have a book down here somewhere. Now is this the one I'm looking for? This is not the one I'm looking for because I'm looking in the wrong looking in the wrong place. Where is it? There it is. I really should figure out my bullshit. Right, so let me just change this over for a sec. This is the Beowulf manuscript. Now this has all been translated by R.D. Falk, by the way, who is pretty much one of the only names you need to worry about. Now this, as we can see here, this contains Passion of St. Christopher, The Wonders of the East, Letters of Alexander to Aristotle, Beowulf and Judith. And it's important to understand that Beowulf was written by 2 scribes. About halfway through, I think it's 1936, I think, the text actually starts to change. Scribe 1 wrote the first 3 and the first half of Beowulf, and Scribe 2 wrote the second half of Beowulf and Judith. And we all know that those ones are definitely copies because we know where other versions of these things are. But that brings us on to Kevin Kiernan. And if you're interested in what Kevin Kiernan has to say, I would suggest we track down this book, Beowulf and the Beowulf manuscripts. Now, he breaks down a lot of what he did. He also has a very high resolution scans of the manuscript, which he did years ago now. but we'll get to that. Sorry about the clicky, but there we are. So Kevin Keenan's radical challenge, late composition around 1000 to 1016. So he thinks that the manuscript that we have now in the British Library is the original and only copy that was ever written. Others might have been destroyed later on when Henry VIII did his thing. But so that was when it was composed. So he thinks that the poem itself was composed and then written down as, a lot of people disagree. A lot of people agree with this. So let's just get into it. In 1996, Kevin Keenan published Beowulf and the Beowulf manuscript, that book I just showed you, a work that would fundamentally challenge the consensus. Keenan's thesis is provocative and controversial. Keenan's arguments. The manuscript may be much closer to the original composition than traditionally believed. The poem could have been composed around 1000, not 700, possibly during the reign of King Canute. I'm glad I spelled that properly. The Great. One of the two scribes may have been involved in the composition or adaptation of the poem. Keenan suggests that Scribe B, who wrote the second half, who took over mid-sentence in 1939, that was a few out, may not have been merely copying an ancient text, but actually composing or adapting it. It does make you wonder why monks, especially in this time period where it was very, very Christian, would be telling stories about foreigners, essentially, Scandinavians, Danes. Because when we look at the other poems that are in the manuscript, the Noel Codex, which again, something we'll get to later, Passion of St. Christopher is about a giant dude with a dog's head who is a Christian and he's fighting for his own religion. Wonders of the East is written from a very Christian point of view. Letters of Alexander, the Great, Aristotle, again, heavily Christianized. And Judith apparently is in the fucking Bible. All of them portraying Christians, none of them portraying Danes, foreigners, with a touch of Christianity slid into it, as it were. I mean, it could have been more heavily Christianized. The other consensus might have been that these were all put together because they have dragons in them and other creatures like that. One of these two scribes, that did. What if the Beowulf we have is not a faithful copy of an 8th century original, but a 10th century creation shaped by the hands and minds of the scribes themselves? The manuscript's own integrity should be respected. Keenan warns against reconstructing hypothetical earlier versions without strong evidence. The text we have is the text we should study. And yes, it's the only text we have, and it's the only thing we've been studying, but to suggest that because it's the only one we have, it might have been literally the only one that was ever written is a bit much, considering what Henry VIII did later on, which was to just, I think we get to that in the part 2, and maybe the end of this part, but that was fucked up. And I have a name, again, it's in here somewhere, of the guy who may well have saved some of the original ones. Anyway, digital paleography, digital paleography, evidence of active composition. So what he's saying here is, from looking at the way everything was written, suggests that someone was listening to it while they were writing. Now, that could be because Scribe B was effectively dictating while Scribe A was writing down, or it could have been that Scribe B was reading it and then Scribe A was just copying what he was saying. But they don't suggest that, as far as I know. Using fiber optic backlighting and high resolution imaging, Kienan's electric Beowulf project. I just had electric boogaloo in my head just then. Has revealed erasures, corrections, and marginal notes that suggest the scribes were shaping the text, not passively copying. Or maybe they were just correcting errors because, people are stupid. You can see where I sit on this in this area, because I don't believe it was written at that time period. I do believe the Beowulf is a far older story that was written down many, many years later. But, I mean, this is between 1000 and 1016. I don't believe that whatsoever. But why this matters, if Keenan is right and Beowulf was not an ancient poem preserved through the centuries, but a medieval creation, the 10th century poet or scribe's imaginative reconstruction of a Scandinavian past, this would fundamentally change how we understand the poem's purpose, its audience, and its meaning. He also, at this point as well, is suggesting that the scribes, in this case Scribe B, created it on the fly. I don't see it. I don't see monks making up stories about Scandinavians. I really don't. And we can argue what Alcuin said about monks that were actually doing that in church. He said that they're the church is for Jesus, not for, who was his name? Ingild. What does Ingild have to do with Christ, is what he said. I just spilled tea on my fucking shorts. Luckily, it hit the pocket fold, and so it's not, seeping. The opposition. How far are we into this? 13 fucking minutes. This is going to take... We're not even fucking halfway down this yet. This is going to take fucking ages. The opposition. Linguistic evidence, 2000, Michael LePage. Is that his name? LePage? I have no idea, I'm sorry. And other scholars counter Keenan's thesis with linguistic and paleographic evidence. Scribal errors point to an earlier original. He argues that the certain areas in the manuscript can only be explained if the scribes were copying from an earlier, different version. These errors suggest a pre-750 script. The language fits 8th century culture better than 10th century culture. And this is another thing. Would someone 250 years later be able to speak with that level of that vernacular and that kind of accent? Having said that, would a story that's that old, would it not have changed with the way people speak at the time? Would it have just been spoken verbatim? Or, would that even be possible? Language fits 18th century better than 10th century culture. The poem's vocabulary, themes, and cultural references align more closely with Northumbrian court culture than the West Saxon and culture of the 10th century. Keenan's interpretation of the paleographic evidence is speculative, while Keenan's digital imaging is impressive. Critics argue that erasures and corrections are normal in any manuscript and don't necessarily indicate thorough composition. So this digital imaging they're talking about, there's a website, digital manuscript. I'll find the website. I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'll find it up in the description below. But Keenan's put all of the digital versions of these like high resolution scans of all of the fucking pages online. I'll try and find it and I'll link it down below. They talk about the vocabulary and the themes and the cultural references here. What they kind of mean is the burial scene at the end of Beowulf. They reckon that it's too precise, it's too accurate, because they weren't doing this kind of burial in that time. You would have had to have seen it with your own eyes to actually be able to describe it in that detail. I think there's a lot of information that's for and against that argument, the Keenan argument, but we'll see. The ongoing debate. The truth remains contested. And I think that we should never, can we just leave it as a mystery because it makes it more interesting? I think when we discover the truth of everything, we kind of take away some part of the essence of why it's so interesting. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? The truth remains contested. Kiernan's work has forced scholars to reconsider the assumptions, or their assumptions, but no consensus has emerged. The Beowulf manuscript continues to be a site of scholarly that fucking word again. I really shouldn't write that word if I can't fucking say it properly. Controversy. A text that refuses to yield its secrets easily and good. The place of origin and mystery. Well, a lot of people reckon it's East Anglia, which is right here. Theories about the poem's originated included East Anglia. The poem's heroes are connected with the Wulfengus dynasty. I'm trying to remember the family tree from one of the books. East Anglian royal family, some scholars argue that the poem was composed at the East Anglian court, where Wessex, a dominant Anglo-Saxon kingdom in the 9th and 10th centuries. The surviving manuscript is a West Saxon dialect, suggesting a Wessex connection. Danelaw. Was Danelaw even a thing in the early 700s? I don't think it was. Given that the Viking Age didn't start until, 793. So I think Danelaw's going to be a thing. The Viking influence. The Reign of England, the poem's Scandinavian heroes and themes might suggest Danelaw origin. I don't think it's Danelaw, because I don't think Danelaw existed back then. We were getting raids and some trade with Danes at that time. There's only a few documented attacks of Danes before the Viking Age in 793. And they were, of course, on the East Coast. No consensus exists. The poem's heroes are Scandinavian, but the poem is written in Old English. No shit, Sherlock. It may have been composed to celebrate Scandinavian past or to claim kingship with Scandinavian rulers. The truth remains elusive. Now, when I talk about to celebrate Scandinavian past, this is where we get stories like the saga of King Rolf Kraki and the Grettir saga, which have similar themes in them. When it comes to Rolf Kraki, look up Both of Bjarki, and the Grettir saga. Again, he fights monsters. One's a male, one's female. There's water involved. There's a waterfall. There's an underground thing in it. There's a lot of parallels with Beowulf, and the idea being that it's a particular type of story that has just permeated through and it's been embellished in certain ways. And our one was just embellished the way Beowulf got done. In Iceland, it got embellished into the Grettir saga, and of course, then you have King Rolf Kraki, which I think was a bead thing. I'll have to look that up. I can't remember. And that would all tie into the Bear Sun Tale, written by a dude named Frederick Panzer, I think his name is. Do I have the book? Where's the book? Where's the fucking book? There we are. Doesn't really say much on here. It says his name, and the title there just says Panzer Beowulf. Now, this, unfortunately, is in fucking German, and I don't read German. I bought it because... because I just wanted to. I'm assuming you heard that rip. But it is a big thesis kind of thing on the Bear Sun Tale and how it relates to Beowulf in all of this. And I would love to be able to read through this. I just don't understand German. Only the stuff I hear in war movies anyway. Right, so part 2 of all of this manuscript comes into being. Oh, dear me. Yeah, so let's use this one because bigger me. The manuscript comes into being circa 1000 CE. 2 scribes, 1 epic, and a book of monsters. The creation around the year 1000 CE, give or take a decade, like we said earlier. Kevin Kiernan believes it's more somewhere to around like 1016-ish. Most other people would say 975 to 1025. The poem was finally written down on vellum, calfskin, and this actually still exists today in the British Library, right next to King's Cross Station, or St Pancras, or King's Cross St Pancras. This is the moment when Beowulf transitioned from oral tradition or lost written copies to a physical manuscript. The two scribes, a change of hands. The manuscript was produced by two distinct scribes, and the handwriting tells the story. Let me try and find, because I actually have a copy of this, and it just says Beowulf on there. And if you're a big up on Beowulf kind of person, which could be why you're watching this video right now, I'm going to put that on the screen right there. Hopefully it focuses. There we go. If you can track down a copy of this, what this is basically, it'll have the translation on one side and the manuscript facsimile on the other side. But what we can do is we can go to what page, what number was it? 1939. So let's go to 1939 in here. 1300, 1700, 1900. And it should be on this page here. We can see here. Where are we? There we are. The first three lines, you can see the spacing, you can see the actual type itself. I'd say type, the handwriting, and then we get a completely different handwriting now. And this is what they mean, but this is the point where scribe A and scribe B switched over. Two different styles of writing. And yeah, so that's what that means. And if you do, I can't even remember, I might have found this on eBay. I can't remember how much I paid for it. This isn't an original. This is, I think this came in 1981. The original would have been, wow, 1882. If you can find a copy of that, fucking good luck to you. Also wrote the preceding text. So this is what I meant earlier on. Okay, Scribe A wrote the first 1,939 lines of Beowulf. Also wrote the preceding texts of the Codex, and we're talking about the Noel Codex here, because the manuscript itself is made up of two codexes, which I think we'll mention later on. The Passion of Saint Christopher, Wonders of the East, and the Letters of Alexander to Aristotle was Scribe A. And then apparently he then stopped transcribing and just started transcribing. I'm using the wrong terminology here. His handwriting is more careful and formal. His work suggests a trained, experienced scribe. Scribe B took over mid-sentence on line 1939 and finished a poem and continued through Judith. If you get a chance to read Judith, I highly recommend it. It's really good. And it's like, so we're going back to the year 1000. We have a woman, it's basically about a woman called Judith, obviously, who gets revenge. And it's pretty fucked up what she does. But when we hear about feminists talking about, no one ever did this sort of thing. This was happening 1,000 years ago. This is a Bible story, so we could go back even further than that. His handwriting, slightly more hurried and less formal. His work suggests either a less experienced scribe or one working under time pressure. It was a long fucking poem. It's the longest poem in the Codex. What is it? 3,189 lines. It's the biggest piece, biggest chunk of book. Considering the other three, Judith and these ones up here, they're not complete. There's sections missing. So there's that as well. This is still recording, right? Yeah. The mid-poem change, what does it mean? The change of hands mid-poem has fueled speculation for centuries. Was Scribe B the poet himself? Unlikely. Again, the story suggests this possibility. If the poem was being composed as it was being written, then Scribe B might be the author. Okay. Again, I seriously doubt it. Oh, was he a collaborator? Perhaps Scribe A and Scribe B were working together on a collaborative project. They were writing the manuscript together. And Scribe B taken over when Scribe A became tired or unavailable. What's that thing they actually study handwriting? I wonder if you could do that with other manuscripts to see if we could find that when either one of these scribes wrote something else. It would have been likely they would have. The whole monastic thing was about just doing this. Typically always Bibles, but things changed around that time, didn't they? Or simply a second copyist. The most conservative explanation is that scribe finished the portion and handed the manuscript to B to complete the job, a normal division of labour in the scriptorium. Yes. That's what I think. Maybe scribe fucking died or something. Maybe. Who knows? Who fucking knows? The truth is unknowable. The truth is unknowable, but the change of hands remains one of the most intriguing features in the manuscript. But then does this mean the scribe created Saint Christopher, the Letters of Monsters, the other three came before it, and scribe created Judith? We know this is not right, because we know that there are other versions of these poems that are much older than this manuscript, and largely not in the UK at the time. So they probably would have been copying these from other copies, put them together, because they all contain monsters, I think. Except Judith. Does Judith contain a monster? I haven't read Judith in a while. I have it right there. I have a few versions of it, I think. What was that book I had over there before? No, that's Widsith. Widsith is another one. Yeah, Widsith is interesting. It's basically just a guy riffing off all these people that he's met, and where he met them, and a couple Beowulf characters get mentioned. But Widsith is supposed to be historical, I think. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be historical. Anyway, the Codex, the Book of Monsters. Beowulf was not bound alone. It was compiled with the other texts, all dealing with exotic monsters or wondrous subjects. Saint Christopher, the saint's life featuring a giant saint and his encounters with demons. He also had the head of a dog. Wonders of the East, a catalogue of exotic marvels and monsters from distant lands. And I think that the Saint Christopher species, whatever he is also mentioned here. It got boring, but then again, so did Alexander, the Letters of Alexander the Great to Aristotle, a pseudo-historical account of Alexander the Great's travels to exotic lands. Not historically accurate. Judith, the biblical poem about a Hebrew heroine who beheads the Assyrian general. I think he rapes her, and then she manages to escape, amass an army, come back, and then kill him. I was thinking of Joan of Arc then. Beowulf, an epic about a hero fighting monsters. Yes. Yes. That's what you want. Big, burly muscle men fighting monsters. Like the 80s. What was this group telling us? All 5 texts deal with monsters, marvels, and the exotic. The compiler may have viewed Beowulf not as a unified heroic epic, but as one marvel among many. A story of monsters and wonders grouped with other tales and the strange and the terrible. This suggests that the medieval audience may have read Beowulf differently than we do today, not as a unified epic of heroism and tragedy, but as one wondrous among many, a catalogue of marvels, grouped together with exotic tales and monstrous encounters. This context is crucial for understanding how the poem was received and interpreted in the modern period. The manuscript itself tells us how medieval readers understood Beowulf. Did any of that make any sense to me? I wrote it a fucking long time ago. I should have just read through this first. Now, this video is already about 30 minutes long. I could continue. I'm about halfway, so we're looking at maybe an hour, unless I just stop talking and keep reading. Part 3, The Lost Centuries. So this is where we get to the reason why it's called the Noel Codex. So 1000 to 1563 current era. Survival through catastrophe. The monastic years. Over 500 years after this creation, the manuscript's location was unknown. It likely resided in a monastic library, perhaps in a cathedral scriptorium, a monastery's collection, or a noble household's private library. During this period, the manuscript survived the Norman conquest of 1066 and the transformation of the English culture. We're going through another one right now, weirdly. The rise and fall of various Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, the gradual shift from Old English to Middle English, the development of the new literary forms and tastes. My eyes aren't too good. Yet somehow the manuscript endured. In an age when Old English texts were lost, destroyed, or forgotten, Beowulf survived, a testament to either its value or simply good luck. I imagine it's probably both. 1536 to 1541, the dissolution of the monasteries. This is what I was talking about earlier on. This period was catastrophic for English manuscripts. King Henry VIII breaking with Rome because he wanted to marry someone else, and establishing a Church of England to dissolve the monasteries and seize their lands and treasures. The destruction. Monasteries were closed and their libraries dispersed. Many manuscripts were destroyed, burned, or sold as scrap paper. Valuable texts were lost forever. The cultural heritage of Anglo-Saxon England was nearly obliterated. The fact that the Beowulf manuscript survived at all is remarkable, a stroke of luck or perhaps an intervention of a scholar or collector who recognized its value and rescued it from destruction. Some attribute this to John Leland, Henry's antiquary. I should stop using words I can't fucking read. Here's a brief summary of the John Leland. Yes, this dude. That word that I can't. Oh, you absolute munter. That word there. I don't know what it is. Anyway, here's a brief summary of John Leland. 1503 to 1552, was an English poet, scholar, and antiquary who lived during the Tudor period. He was born in London, educated at St. Paul's, Christ's College, Cambridge, and All Souls School, Oxford. Leland was often called the father of English local history and bibliography because of his pioneering work in the documenting of the England's historical and topographical details. Under King Henry VIII, he travelled extensively throughout England and Wales, gathering information. Just put you down here. Nice, put you down here because you're really starting to annoy me. He travelled extensively throughout the antiquaries and manuscripts, working that was later compiled into his itinerary. He also wrote Latin poetry and planned large-scale historical works, though these were never completed. That is a shame. Many of the manuscripts included in the collection of antiquarian notes, descriptions of British writers and places, because they were resources for later historians, and were eventually housed in the Bodleian Library at Oxford. In short, Leland was a foundational figure in the study of England's history and antiquities. Blending scholarly research and extensive field observation, one wonders if he knew of Beowulf manuscript's existence, or in fact already had it. Who knows? 1563, Lawrence Noel. Now, everything I just mentioned about Leland, this is all speculation. We have no evidence for any of this, not a thing. But so from the writing of the manuscript, which date is, again, we don't know. This is the only date we know for sure was Lawrence Noel's signature. The first specific historical fact regarding ownership is the signature of Lawrence Noel written on the first page of the manuscript with the date 1563. Who was Lawrence Noel? Lawrence Noel, 1530 to 1570. Was an Elizabethan antiquarian and one of the earliest scholars of Old English. He was fascinated by the Anglo-Saxon past and collected manuscripts to study the language and culture of pre-Norman England. So, well, I mean, he could have had it for study, and maybe he did study it, maybe he didn't, we don't know. His significance: he was the pioneer of Anglo-Saxon studies at the time of Old English, largely forgotten. He recognised the value of Beowulf manuscripts. Did he recognise it? We have no evidence of this. We just know he wrote on it. Would have discussed it as worthless. Well, many would have dismissed it as worthless. His signature on the manuscript is a mark of rescue. He likely saved it from destruction during the Elizabethan era. Again, conjecture. He was part of the small circle of antiquarians who are beginning to recover, study, and Anglo-Saxon past. The Noel Codex. It is from Noel that the manuscript gets its name, Noel Codex. His ownership of the manuscript, his ownership inscription survives on the manuscript, and his name is attached to it for over one. This is what the book actually looks like. Yes, this is what the manuscript actually looks like. We can see Beowulf and these things here. Hellefardens, they're part of the whole thing. Anglo-Saxon, Cotton Vitalis AXV. So that's what it's called now. But this is 2 codexes. Doesn't tell us that there might be. I think that could be the first codex in the manuscript, which would be the Suffolk Codex. I don't think I have. I could have swore I had it. I had a PDF of that book I just showed you there. Oh, look, it's talking. Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, the Noah Codex, the Noah Codex, its ownership, inscription survives the manuscript. And the name has been attached for over 450 years. Part 4, the Cotton Collection. This is the dude we were just talking about. Early 17th century, so it'd be 731, I think, if I remember right. The 17th century, Sir Robert Cotton acquires the manuscripts. The manuscript was later acquired by Sir Robert Cotton, 1571 16. Maybe it wasn't 17. Oh no, he died and then it was in his library. I got the date right, so he was dead at the time. One of the greatest antiquarians of the English Renaissance and a man obsessed with collecting manuscripts. The Cotton Library. A unique organizational system. Cotton was not content with simply collecting manuscripts. He organized them in a way that was both ingenious and eccentric. The system. Cotton organized his library using busts of Roman emperors. Each shelf was topped with a bust of a different emperor, and his manuscript was catalogued according to which shelf it occupied. The Beowulf manuscript was placed in the cabinet under the bust of Emperor Vitalis on the first shelf A and was the 15th volume XV. Hence the official shelf name, Cotton Vitalis AXV. And this is still the name it uses at the British Library, by the way. This system was both brilliant and confusing. Brilliance, it created a memorable visual system for organizing large collections. Scholars could easily remember where the manuscript was located by remembering which emperor's bust it was under. Confusing, the system had nothing to do with the manuscript's content. A manuscript about Anglo-Saxon poetry might be shelved next to a manuscript about Roman history simply because they happen to be in the same size or acquired at the same time. So I'm wondering if the shelving order was like autobiographical, or was it simply because of the size of the book and it just looked nicer? Aesthetics or autobiographical, what do you think of it? The resulting manuscript's location is tied not to the subject matter but to the Cotton's aesthetic arrangement of Roman busts. This is confused scholars ever since. Yeah, well, I mean, if you look at my filing system, it's a fucking mess, so I can relate. Cotton's binding and joining of 2 manuscripts. This is where we get to it. And this is where we get to the Suffolk Priory there. Not Southwick, Suffolk. I could be wrong about that, because there is a Suffolk, and it's not spelled like that. South Fork. The composition manuscript, the codex as it exists today, is actually a composition of 2 separate manuscripts. The Noel Codex, which contains Beowulf, what we've been talking about, and the 12th century manuscript from the Suffolk Priory. I'm going to call it Suffolk because that's how I've always called it. Containing Augustine's soliloquies and the Gospel of, yes, so it was that extra band that I mentioned earlier on. These 2 unrelated manuscripts are bound together by Cotton in the early 17th century, creating the single volume we know today. Why did Cotton do this? The reasons are unclear. Perhaps he thought they belonged together. Perhaps he wanted to preserve both in a single. Perhaps he wanted to preserve both in a single sturdy volume. Perhaps simply because the two damaged manuscripts, and decided to bind them together for protection. Maybe they were just on his table together at the same time because he bought them together, and they were the same size. It's a nice binding, though. Whatever the reasons, the result is that the original structure of the Beowulf proportion is now obscured by the 12th century material binding with it. It has been. Did they try to do that? I mean, they could use MRI scanner, right? Functional MRI and create 3D things. I've done that with other things before. I did it with was that a mummy recently? And then they were able to scan the actual person inside it without opening the thing. So could they do that and unravel the binding that we can't see behind all the other stuff? Cotton's legacy, the Cotton Library. Cotton's collection was vast and valuable. When he died in 1631, his library passed to his son and eventually to the British nation. In 1700, the Cotton Library was donated to the British Museum, now the British Library, where it remains today. It's supposed to be going on display this year. I think they put it on display once a year. Was it March or May? I can't remember. I'll have to look it up. The Beowulf manuscript, catalogued as the Cotton Vitalis AXV, became part of one of the world's greatest collections of manuscripts. The Catastrophe and Narrow Escape. So in 1731, the Ashburnham House fire and the burning of the edges. So it's a house called Ashburnham and there was a fire. I'm just going to leave that there for a second. October 23rd, 1731, the fire. In 1700, the Cotton Library was donated to the British nation. In 1731, it was housed at the Ashburnham House in Westminster when disaster struck. I don't think the house exists anymore. Anyway, the disastrous fire broke out in the building. The Beowulf manuscript was saved from destruction, but it is scalded, which if we look at, just grab a single page, you can see that the pages, you can see the sides here. So scalded, those parts of the page dried out, and effectively over time it just fell apart. The British Museum tried to stop all that from happening, and they ended up binding it in a book that we have. That binding that we saw earlier was this one that they made, I think, for this. I think. Let's read on. Seven destruction, the scorched edges, the vellum were burned, and the heats made the vellum brittle and fragile. The slow crumbling, a gradual loss. Over the following years and decades, the burning of the edges manuscript gradually crumbled away. Letters and words, the margins were lost, not all at once, but slowly as the brittle vellum deteriorated. The damage, you're probably wondering how I was able to get such a great translation of the entire thing before it fell apart. But given that the epilogue is coming up down here, we'll get to Mr. Thorkelin in the next video. But let's continue. The damage, the edges and the pages, is that where we were? Yes, the images of the pages scorched and blackened, the vellum became brittle and fragile. As time passed, the edges crumbled away, yada, 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 the words and margins lost forever. By the 19th century, significant portions of the text had vanished, readably only in earlier transcripts, or in the memories of scholars who had seen the manuscript before the fire. The irony. Ashburnham House fire. The manuscript has survived the dissolution of the monasteries, the Elizabethan era, and centuries of handling. It has now been in Lawrence. It had been rescued by Lawrence Noel and preserved by Robert Cotton, and then in a single night a fire destroyed it. Well, nearly destroyed it. I actually wrote nearly destroyed it, but decided to ignore that word. It was saved because someone threw it out the window. So at this point, a 700-year-old manuscript was just tossed out a window to save it from a fire. I mean, good save, but damn, son. Anyway, the epilogue. Is that where we were? yeah, let's get into the epilogue. The epilogue. Why this manuscript matters? The Beowulf manuscript is not just a historical artifact; it is a full human effort. I'm just going to ignore that word. Palimpsest of human centuries of work, preservation, and interpretation. The layers of effect. I need to learn to read. I really should learn to read my own shit. Yeah, anyway, we've been through all this. We've literally just been talking about all this. And there's some Thorkelin right there, who we're going to get to in the next version of this. We'll just have a quick gander at the first part of it. So I shouldn't have done that, but I did it anyway. That's the thing. Yeah. I'll see you in part 2 because I've got nothing else to say. This video is 50 minutes. Good luck getting through that. Anyway, I'm going to turn this off and I will see you. I'll see you in the next one. Like, subscribe, and all that jazz.